This episode is brought to you by Peak, the blockchain for real-world applications and home of DePIN. If you think it's time for Web3 to get real, check out their website at peak.network. That's peaq.network. Hello, everyone. Daniel from DePIN Hub over here, and I have today for the DePIN Hub podcast my old friend Joey from Helium Foundation. Me and Joey, we go very back in the time. Joey actually was the person who told me to go and deploy and ship it, the first version of the Hotspotty application. So that's like someone that is being with us through a long, like so many different stories in the time of like building the Helium network and the very, very early stage of the DePIN ecosystem, right? Well, Joey, it's a pleasure to have you today on the podcast. Thanks for joining. Let's start by introducing yourself, your background, and actually, how the hell did you start with Helium?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me hang out with you a little bit today. You keep super busy. I don't get enough time to hang out or chat with you anymore. So this will be fun. I think really similar to you, I got started in Helium probably a lot of the same way. I was sort of lucky enough to see an advertisement on, I think it was Instagram at the time. And I was like, well, what's this wireless network thing? Like, I like building stuff like that. Like, I'll try out a blockchain for it. Why not? This kind of neat. And then bought my very first hotspot. I think it was late 2019. I had it set up. I remember watching it over Christmas break and just being like, what is going on? Like these pings are bouncing all over, like, and I can see this thing actually working. And so it was just like, it got really tangible and it started to make a lot of sense really quickly. And that very quickly rolled into more hotspots and more sensors and building stuff and experimenting. And, I think I have a dozen or so hotspots. I know you definitely shadow me in that domain. Got in and started building sensors and showing demos and just, trying to like show people like, hey, this thing works and you can go and build actual products and solve actual problems with this thing. And that all, just sort of, it turned into basically my nighttime job. A lot of people thought I worked for Helium for this whole time, but I actually ended up joining the Helium Foundation. I think it was about 3 years ago now. And actually it's more like 2.5, I guess. But ever since, I've just been heads down 100%. So, I'd left my last job a couple months before that, and I was just focused on building things. And I was lucky enough to be able to join the team. So working on all sorts of stuff on the Helium side now, largely focused on the IoT side. Of course, we've grown to build this whole mobile network is now thriving and growing, which is really exciting to see. But on the IoT side, like, we're laser focused on helping people find uses for the network, bring customers on, make sure the network stays really robust. So yeah, all exciting stuff on that end of it. And obviously got to hang out with you through the whole time. We've seen Hotspotty grow to this like huge thing, and you guys are a company now, which is crazy. And I remember there were like a couple of other block explorers out on the old Helium L1, and you guys just stuck around and built like the best thing that was out there.
Yeah, man, because I guess, like I like to say, whenever I understood what Helium was, it was just like this kind of like a light bulb moment of like, oh my God, this is actually it's a revolutionary technology right now. Because LoRa was around for quite some time, but not the idea of like actually rewarding people for deploying the infrastructure. And yeah, like you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I couldn't stop talking about it, like being on Discord. And then like, that's why we got to know each other and other people on the team. Do you remember what was the number, more or less, when you bought your first device?
Maybe 1,000 or 2,000 hotspots on the network, I think. There were really not many. Like the early days, now Nova Labs, formerly Helium Inc., they only built 20,000 of those first gateways. So like, I think you and I were there for the whole first 20,000, and then third-party manufacturers in that equation. And then all of the craziness that happened after that. So it was definitely not more than 20,000 at that point.
I have 2 here actually that I'm gonna save them for a museum.
Yep.
But yeah, they're stuck together. But like, there's like these bad boys, like saw a lot of data package going through them. It was a very interesting time on that, because I think
like because of Max was the one who actually told me about Helium. He knew that I was a bit more technical on the engineering side. I think when I set up my first one was like a do-it-yourself device, was like 4,000 devices on the network or something at that time. And then
You probably had one of the first ones in Europe then. Like,
no, definitely. Like I remember looking at the map, there was one in England or one or two in England, but between France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, like most part of Europe was definitely the first one, because I managed to like convince like Travis to give me the key to onboard the device, because I already have actually all the hardware at home from my previous like playing with LoRa with the Things network in the past, like in 2017, 2016. So I was kind of lucky enough that for that I was okay. I can build my own device and I can start playing. But of course, at the time, like a device alone didn't make a lot of like rewards. But I didn't care about that, right? Because at that time, the idea of like setting up the network, you're building something as part of a community was so exciting that I remember I need to find it. I have it somewhere probably. A little harder. There was just like you press a button, it sends a package. And then I had like in one hand, I have the thing in my phone. Yeah, exactly. I have like my phone in my hand and there's device one. I was walking around the neighborhood like a crazy person, just pressing the button and seeing if the package showed up in the console and see how far I could go.
Yep. Yeah, well, that was like the early day mapper stuff. We were just walking around trying to see how far these things reached and figure it out. But, and then I guess the other thing you touched on is like Helium came out kind of in a bear market too. Like there was not a lot going on. Bitcoin was down. Like, COVID was about to start, right? Oh, what a flashback. But then, everyone was just building the network because they're like, this thing's super cool. And then it just kind of blew up from there. But like, there were no markets for tokens or any of that stuff. Like it was just folks like you and me sort of being like, wow, this thing's neat. Like we should keep at this.
Actually, one question that I think is valid to answer for the people. What is Helium IoT network? I would guess like 99% of our listeners already know that. But it's still interesting for those 1% who don't.
Yep. No, it's always a good question. And I even talk to developers a lot who have done like IoT stuff, like Wi-Fi or HomeKit, things like that. And the type of IoT that we do on Helium usually isn't even on their radar. It's kind of this, it's a bit more of a new protocol, and it's never really been that accessible until Helium has existed. So Helium on the IoT side operates this protocol called LoRaWAN, and it's a standard that has been developed over time. It's this thing that came out of Semtech, who builds these LoRa chips, and they built this stack to do it, and it's sort of grown into a little bit more of like a licensable, like available thing now. But the protocol, you can kind of think of it as like a mashup. I like to think of it as a mashup of like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and cellular. And it takes some of the best parts of all of those things to target very specific applications. So it's like the things that you need, that they need to be low power, probably because they're operating on battery. They need to operate long distances away. So, think your AirTags. Those only go about like 15 feet or so from a phone until they're just gone. And so LoRaWAN, on the other hand, is like mile, right? Like you can go super, super long distances. There's this thing that I was playing with the other day, and a guy just like faked RF packets without a radio at all. So it was this super tiny whisper of a little message coming off of this just piece of wire. And he was getting like almost like a kilometer of distance out of it. So you can do really ugly things and it still really works. And then the other part of it is it's good for like low data transmission stuff. So think like a pet tracker or a temperature sensor or weather station or metrics on your car, things like that. But not necessarily like streaming video from a remote camera or something like that. And so when you sort of combine all of those things, you can build this network where each Helium gateway provides this big sort of dome of coverage, right? And all of those can overlap. It's totally fine for gateways to be in overlapping areas. You're not going to have like interference like you'd have to worry about with like cell towers and things like that. because mostly what that gateway is doing is just sitting there listening. It's not actively broadcasting a bunch of stuff all the time like a cell tower would, because the device itself just sends out little messages, and those gateways are just waiting to receive it and then send that out over the internet so it can be received by whoever that owner is.
That's amazing. Yeah, I know. It's a good explanation for those who don't know. I think most people in the podcast do, but the idea of DePIN Hub Podcast is also to get a lot of new people into this ecosystem. And of course, Helium, I wouldn't say it's the first DePIN project, but it's definitely the company that really made it, let's say, mainstream, right? Because like we had in the podcast before, like StoreJ, they actually started as a blockchain project in 2014, but they only got live in 2017, for example. But I mean, it's really, really hard for me to talk about DePIN without mentioning Helium, as it's like Genesis project, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you go ask the Masari guys and some of those other folks that coined DePIN, I think Helium was probably the catalyst for people sitting down and being like, well, what do we call this segment? Because we had Filecoin, we had some other stuff before that, and those just were sort of like, they were just their own thing. It's like, oh, you can do blockchain and you can kind of put files on the internet, or you can do Arweave, some of that other stuff. But Helium took that idea and it said, like, there is a thing that sits in somebody's house and it has to be distributed across the globe. Like, there's the locale of this thing is critical to its success. And I think that's what really catalyzed this idea of, like, there's infrastructure out there and it is tied by this blockchain.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I remember the time when I guess we joined, right? There was Helium Company, and then the Helium Foundation now, it's used to be DY. So initially, instead of DePIN, we usually call it DY, which stands for Decentralized Wireless. And then after that, can you talk a little bit about, for the users, what was the transition like from DY to the Helium Foundation and Helium to Nova? Why did they do that?
Yeah, well, you can actually still email me at joey@dy.org. So all that stuff's still there. And I love that moniker. I think it's still a really great definition for a segment of what we're doing in the broader, like, decentralized space. Yeah, so Helium Inc. existed as this VC-funded startup. They've been trying to build stuff for years, right? Way, way, way before the Helium blockchain existed. And they were always really focused on this idea of building an IoT platform where people could go and deploy devices and it would just be just generally ubiquitous. And this is a similar theme. You mentioned TTN, so the Things Network. And this is the idea where people just buy the gateway and they just go set them up purely out of their own curiosity or because they have a use case that they're trying to back, things like that. But that only grew to a certain amount of scale. And I think the Helium Inc. team sat down and were like, how do we get this thing to really grow? And there's like, all right, Hail Mary, let's throw a blockchain on it. Let's see if we can sort of make this model work. And they sat down and they sort of hammered through it. And I think the thing started to make a lot of sense for them, coming up with these ideas of proof of coverage and building the incentive that's aligned with the thing that you're trying to get out of the network, which is that coverage of this network. And so they built an entire L1. Crazy. They built an entire device management stack. Crazy. They built an entire Explorer. Crazy, right? They built all of this infrastructure with a pretty small team, and built the Helium network, right? And those V1s were pretty smooth, all things considered. And so with that success, like, they built this thing that could effectively live on its own, right? And it didn't need, or nor should it be attached to this for-profit company. And so by splitting out the Helium network from Helium Inc., and then, therefore moving to this new identity of Nova Labs and creating the Helium Foundation, I was one of the sort of earlier folks to come into the Helium Foundation. It was formerly basically just Scott Siegel, our COO, and he stood up the entity. He made it a US-based entity, so it's a 501c6, which is actually pretty rare in the crypto space for people to incorporate and do all of that stuff domestically. But it also helps, I think, when we're talking to network users and things like that. We're like, hey, we are here. We're not in the Bermudas, or we're not going to FTX you or things like that. People get scared when they're in the crypto space, especially coming in from telcos. But so now the Helium Foundation is the stewards of the network. We are the protocol engineers. We sort of drive the governance processes, the education, the advocacy, all of those parts. And then Nova Labs gets to focus primarily on being a for-profit company again. So they now operate, they have the 1663 arm, which is sort of the IoT incubator. And then they also have Hello Helium, which is the cell carrier. It's effectively a Mint Mobile or, any of these other MVNOs that's operating both on top of T-Mobile's network as well as the Helium network. And that's what provides all that backhaul for them. And Telefonica. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
That gives a picture of a bit of like the genesis of it as well as like the split. So on the Helium Foundation side, we're just super heads down on making the thing work, making it successful for the community, making it successful for the ecosystem. We're not, building a business or anything like that. It is a very different goal.
I mean, looking from the outside, it looks like more that Nova is mostly focused on the mobile, and then Helium Foundation is more focused on like building the ecosystem and the IoT as well, right?
When we did the mint of the mobile tokens, we actually basically issued a grant to Nova Labs. It says like, you are responsible for building all of the infrastructure that backs this mobile carrier. And then otherwise it would just been like, great, now we have to go hire like 100 people to figure this thing out, right? Like they had the expertise to do that, like Freedom Fi's internal, all of those folks. And the Helium Foundation, we are basically completely running the IoT side of the network. We do work with some of the engineers in the Nova Labs team, and we basically just treat them as a core developer pool. There's also folks outside of the Nova Labs team that we leverage in that same capacity. So it's a central hub.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody's trying to help the Helium as a whole to grow, right? Because I follow a lot of like things are happening, like for example, the deny list. There's people from the Nova Labs, like the CTO, that keeps working on that as well. I guess alongside you guys, right? I think I can imagine there's a lot of cooperation for sure on that.
They're actually mostly running that. The community passed some governance that basically affirmed Nova Labs to keep running that, and I think we're probably due for some more governance to sort of reaffirm that decision. But yeah, one of the challenges of decentralized physical infrastructure is people can do bad things to physical stuff. They can do bad things to virtual stuff too, but it's a lot harder when you let somebody like sit down in their lab and like throw an oscilloscope on something. And so there's a critical part of that where we have to continue to evolve the protocol to make sure that we detect and support a network of strong utility. And so that's where some of those parts come from. And effectively the way that process works is like we do some detection, and then all of that gets sort of casted up to the actual proof of coverage algorithm. So you do some manual stuff at the low level, you figure out the process, and then you automate it and build it in.
Yeah, I think that's something interesting, at least I find extremely interesting to talk about. When I first understood that the Helium, the way that they did, like they were saying, they initially have their own layer one. And their first like idea that they had is like, okay, we're going to have many devices in the field. Can each of those devices become like a full node of the blockchain, right? And I remember like this was like a very aggressive idea. But it was beautiful. I thought it was like, okay, man, you're going to have like hundreds of thousands of devices. It's going to be the biggest blockchain I've ever seen. In one way, it wasn't it the fastest rollout of any infrastructure in history, I would say, with like 1 million devices in a little bit over 2 years. Like it's never seen before. And also the creation of the POC, the proof of coverage. Can you talk a little bit about how that works? Because I found it extremely interesting. Because you had, I guess, initially also the chicken and egg problem, right? Like nobody's going to use the network if there is no coverage. Nobody's going to build the coverage if there is no network. Maybe you can touch a little bit about how that worked, because it's super interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a really good story about why decentralized anything in the first place that's sort of wrapped in there. And if you look at what the job is of one of those gateways, like it has to be plugged into power, has to have some sort of internet backhaul, and it needs to be relatively well positioned, and it's just going to sit there and do its thing. And the bar for that got lowered to such a point where anyone could do it. It effectively, like you look at that and then you compare it to a cell network or something like that. What most people think about is big beefy cables and custom brackets and $100,000 installs. And you realize a lot of that's just sort of this gatekeeping to keep people in the subscriber flow, right? Like, oh, nobody should go build their own network. And we also see that in ISPs, right? People have sort of torn the Band-Aid off there, and they're like, I can actually build like my own local wireless internet service provider. And we see what these wisps, hard to say. We see they stand up all over the place. Like in the Bay Area, there's Monkey Brains. I think Google Fiber maybe, or well, no, they it has a whole thing. But basically what you can do is you can go get like really fast internet, you plug it into an antenna, and then you point that to all the houses in a neighborhood, and you put little antennas up on their houses. And small companies, sometimes even just single people, can take the agency to go build this whole infrastructure and say, like, we did this without Comcast, without AT&T, without all of these people telling us we can't do it. And a lot of time people do it out of frustration, right? They're like, I just want good internet, I'll pay you. And you get killed by customer service time and time again. You just go build it yourself. And so DePIN is kind of that idea of like, we're going to go do it ourselves, but you tie in this incentive mechanism. So as a network user, you want this really robust network, but how do you get there, right? You might have a couple of ideas to use the network right out of the gate, but the network might not be ready. And so proof of coverage is this idea where you can get people to go deploy the network. It's the chicken and egg that you reference. Build this vast coverage. People start getting rewarded. They get excited about it. They set up really robust deployments. I've seen some of your pictures of like custom enclosures, antennas on roofs, and time again, you did that all throughout Portugal. And now what you've done is you've created the network, and now it's ready for usage. And so then people can come in and start leveraging the network, and you have this sort of crossover effect where proof of coverage builds the network, and then you can start to wean yourself off of proof of coverage theoretically to work on the usage side of it. I guess the exciting thing for Helium is we're just starting to see some of that stuff happening. And there's like these consumer use cases that are just directly using the network, and people can see like, wow, my hotspot made that thing work. And those are growing cases. And that's one of the things that I'm just constantly trying to push on. But yeah, I guess that's a couple of ideas wrapped in there. So it's like, why DUI, why proof of coverage, and then sort of like, how does this grow into the future?
PIC is a layer 1 blockchain designed to power DePINs. Why do DePINs choose to build on PIC? It's fast, scalable, low cost, offer builders are ready to deploy DePIN SDK, and is multi-chain. So when you build on PIC, you're building for all Web3. PIC is home for the fastest growing DePIN projects, with more than 100,000 vehicles and devices deployed, over a dozen DePINs already building, and the world-leading device manufacturers such as Boss partner with them. Think of building a DePIN? PIC has a grant program for DePIN builders. If you're listening to this, remember, you're early. The PIC network will launch in the first half of 2024. Check out PIC's channels for more details, and links in the podcast description.
Touching on those use cases, what are some of the interesting use cases that you personally really like?
Where do I start?
There's those guys in Portugal, right? Yeah, there's so many.
Yeah, well, let's talk about green metrics. Like, so I imagine some of your hotspots are actually backing those. If you've got anything in Porto, I think they just did a deployment there, and they didn't install a single hotspot because the city was so well covered with Helium that they could just go and build their thing without worrying about it. So to talk a little about what they're doing is they've got a couple of verticals, but one of the things they've been selling a lot to these municipalities is they go in and they say, we can deploy low-cost sensors throughout your city. We only need a couple of them, and we can tell you when flooding is about to happen downtown. And as these storms roll into Portugal, they had just instant validation from, I think they started in Lisbon. They put a couple of sensors out there, and then they had these like screenshots they're sharing, and it was the mayor's office, and it was their dashboard on the screen, on the news of them sort of saying like, these areas are flooding or these areas are about to flood. And they were able to dispatch emergency responders to go install pumps, like open gates, stuff like that. And so all of that stuff is powered by Helium. It's powered by the gateways that people put out there. And it's enabling what would have been probably really expensive or realistically no solution out there to keep cities safer. So it's just like, it's good feels all around. Like, I love the stuff that they're doing. And it's been really exciting to see them take those ideas and start rolling those out sort of from city to city to city, because they're just getting these sort of like awesome case studies out of it.
Yeah, I remember actually, like whenever they released their first like announcement, I think it was like around this time last year, there was a picture of actually my neighborhood flooded. There was like a small part of the neighborhood that always gets flooded, and like, okay, this is a very good use case. And actually, for the listeners out there, I think like a few days ago, there was some small floodings around Lisbon as well, because Lisbon technically is the sunniest capital of Europe, not sunniest city, but sunniest capital. But for a short period of time, there's a lot of rain, right? Usually it's around end of March in April. There's a lot of rain. And then for these times, I think solutions like that is perfect. Because imagine if it was actually Helium, the company itself, trying to deploy the infrastructure in Lisbon, plus Brazil, plus Africa, plus everywhere else. So I think it would be, virtually impossible. What else?
It would have been impossible. Actually impossible, right? Like,
yeah.
It would have taken forever. It would have cost billions of dollars, if not like, who knows, right? Like, it's crazy.
Would never recover. Helium would never recover financially from that then.
Never.
Right?
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, use cases like that are awesome to see. There's dozens of them now where we see people that have sort of discovered Helium, and then they go and like solve some problem in their community, whether it's, a sensor on a refrigerator at a food bank to, solving something for a giant warehouse or a distribution facility. So that stuff's cool. The other thing that I'm really excited about, and this, sort of touches on this broader DePIN space, is other projects starting to leverage Helium to make their projects work. There's a half dozen of those now. What do we got? Yeah, that's the one I want. So the demo team, I've been chatting with them for, I think it was over a year ago, where we were first like, hey, what about building something that uses Helium? And they did it, and they built it in about a year. And that's a pretty quick turnaround for like a idea to product, like in market timeline. And so what that thing is that Daniel's got, it's an ODB2 reader. So you plug that into the port on a car that has an ODB2 port. And the only way that thing transfers data back to the demo network is over that Helium IoT network. And so the people that have these things have tracking on their car. They get all of the metrics off of their car. And you also get rewarded in demo tokens for doing all of it. So this like little $100 thing has 3 years of connectivity baked into it because of the low cost of Helium. Like, it's just all these cool levels. So like now, if your car were ever to get stolen, you look in your demo app, you're like, oh, it's right here, because that thing is just like pinging out and you actually know exactly where it is. So everyone should have one is basically my point. Like they're
for $100. Cool. Yeah. And just to say, like, as soon as I plug this, I have one in my car as well. As soon as I plug it in, I got a green light saying that has Helium connectivity. Like,
beautiful.
It's just beautiful. Yeah, right? So exciting.
Yep. Yeah. And as an asset tracker, it's actually really good too. I think it updates every 15 seconds or something like that. It's great. And I think they're doing some new improvements to their app so you can see historical data, like all sorts of cool stuff. But then you've got WeatherXM, another cool project. It's like decentralized wireless, decentralized weather network. HiveMapper. In the first two versions of their dash cam have Helium in them. They're using that as a verification method. So yeah, a bunch of cool stuff going on.
Yeah, the composability between DePIN projects is beautiful, right? To see like helping each other, because it just makes a lot of sense. And because they understand the ecosystem they are in, it's like no brainer for them to use other projects. And then I see other projects that are not actually Helium or DePIN compatible start using Helium for other things like agriculture or anything like that. One thing that me and Nick and you actually talk a lot on the State of the Network event that happens every week was that hardware takes a lot of time. Like hardware is much harder to develop and deploy than in the software. So can you see that now more and more of those projects that we're building in the past are starting to pop up now and start joining the network?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, like demo was about a year cycle from this like idea pushing through all the way to like now it's quick. Yeah, because you got to build the thing. It needs to be like queued up in a factory. You have to test them. Like testing isn't just like hit compile and like grab a sandwich. It's like send it to go get PCBs made. They get shipped. You can overnight them for an extra $100. And then you have to like put it together. Like that's a whole thing, right? So those processes are a lot slower. So there's ways to make it a little faster, but it's not easy. And so yeah, they really knocked it out of the park in terms of getting that thing done. I remember one time I put a dev board in an Uber and had the Uber drive just a single dev board over to their developer so he could like take it to a conference. So, the Helium Foundation, like we're here to sort of like support in any way we can, even if it's putting a chip in a car and having it driven over to you. But yeah, we are working with a number of folks that are starting to grow new solutions that are sort of in that same vein. We see a lot of new folks. There's this whole like open LNS thing that we started back about a year ago. And it's this idea that anyone can come in and run a network server. This is the thing that manages and onboards devices to the network. And so we've seen a lot of people come in and start building those out as public services or as private services or as roaming partnerships, things like that. So there's a lot of growth on that front. We're starting to see them start to double down, which is really exciting. And then another really fun one that we just announced just a couple of weeks ago, but the company Particle, so particle.io is their website. They are probably deeply renowned in the developer space. I'm sure, Daniel, you probably have one in a box somewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I did build some things with them. I really like their solution.
Yeah, so they're historically known for building Wi-Fi and cellular connectivity developer boards. So it'd be something, kind of like this little device, but on different protocols. And they are launching a LoRaWAN version of that, and it is also going to have first-class support for Helium. And the really cool thing there is you don't have to think about device provisioning and all of that other stuff because they have this whole software suite that manages it for you. So you basically write your code, you do whatever you're going to want to do on your board. You can go control pumps and all that other crazy stuff. And it'll actually fall back automatically if your Wi-Fi goes out, now it's on Helium, things like that. So there's this redundancy layer that's offered through the protocol, or you can use it directly. Just super cool stuff. So that's upcoming. I'm currently working with that team, and our team is working with them to make sure that thing is successful. But they're super sharp. They're basically already on it. So it's going to be an easy one.
Yeah, and they are in San Francisco as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, I got to meet a couple of them in person. I'm going to, I think, grabbing lunch with some of them in Germany, actually, at Embedded World in 2 weeks too. So.
Oh, amazing! Yeah. I remember visiting there. They invited me to their office. I think it was 2017. Back in the time, I used to post a lot of things on my Instagram about hardware development. Kind of like cool. It's a small niche. Yep. I miss doing those things, but it was different times, and I just came back with a bunch of swag, a bunch of boards. They did a lot of great. The things that they build in terms of like the software, the hardware, the user experience of using their platform is also really, really good. So good shout out for the team at Particle.
I didn't get swag. I just got homework. I left there with more to do.
I'll tell them to change that because that was fun.
Yep.
How do you envision like the Helium network, especially in the IoT form, the next 1, 5, 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. Like we have this really big network now, and that's really exciting to see. The growth of the network was so explosive that we're starting to actually get a really good picture for what is deployed and what is stable, because you had this massive influx into urban centers and all of that, and Helium has this scaling mechanism that tries to disincentivize that, but it didn't stop people from doing it anyway. So you had these areas in the center of San Francisco, there were 200 hotspots set up. And we like a little bit of redundancy, but that's crazy, right? And so we've started to see a lot of that stuff toned down because those hotspots are not incentivized in the same way that more rural hotspots are. And so we've seen this effect of flattening where more rural areas are pretty much the same as they were. The urban areas have sort of settled down. The coverage is great in all of the urban areas. And so now we have a network that's smaller in count of hotspot size, but our coverage is pretty stable. And so we're going to start building more tooling and hopefully community tooling as well that visualizes what that coverage actually looks like so that developers can better understand how they get to use the network. It'll also help the community understand if there's any gaps in coverage, things like that, opportunities to go sort of fill things in, make Helium a more compelling story in their cities. And then, of course, we're just working with companies, basically large and small. We've got everyone from the U.S. Department of Agriculture uses the Helium network all the way down to, I won't make them small, but like Green Metrics, like it started out as two guys trying to like solve a problem. So yeah, everything in between. And then stability. So infrastructure stuff just continues to need to be rock solid. It is a telco thing. People are looking for those 9.9s. So we're going to do our very, very best to make sure that the infrastructure, mirrors that. So lots of fun stuff going on.
Yeah, exciting. I mean, you're definitely going to keep yourself busy for quite some time, I can imagine, right?
Always busy.
Yeah. There's never a dull day on the Helium ecosystem, that's for sure. If the community want to know more about Helium, about yourself and the documentation, the website, etc., where can they go?
Great question. So there's a bunch of places. Helium.com is like our main informational marketing site. I'm with the Helium Foundation, so we are helium.foundation instead of .com. And there's a slightly different set of information there. You'll see a little bit more about governance and some of the, back end of what it means to build this network. And then we have docs.helium.com. That is where you can go to dive in, and everything from build your own data only hotspot to deploy a sensor on the network. All of that stuff is in there. And of course, all of the mobile side, we won't forget it. It's also there. But the spot on my heart is all IoT. So yeah. And then, I think our community's Discord. So discord.gg/helium is sort of the classic place to jump in and troll the moderators about some, whatever you feel like. And of course, there's also Hotspotty. And so you could jump right in, and you can actually either go to explorer.helium.com, which is powered by Hotspotty, or you can go to app.hotspotty.net, and you can see the network live there. Lots of cool stuff to see.
Yeah, it's I can't be more grateful actually for the Helium ecosystem and the Helium network and you guys actually to be allowing me to build these products and start a company from that. And basically something that I've been breathing for the past 3 years, right? Plus, and it's been such an interesting journey that I never expected to join. And the idea of merging electronics, IoT, blockchain, software, hardware, everything that I really enjoy in one project. So I couldn't be more grateful to know you guys and have had the opportunity to, share so many great moments. And I know that we're trying to change a lot of great things and building more honest, decentralized, and fair world for everyone doing this. Just want to thank you so much for joining the podcast today. Hope to have you again. I guess the next time I'm going to get someone from Noble Lab so we can talk a little bit more about the mobile side of things that are quite interesting as well. Like I said, not as I still have IoT much more in my heart, but I think that the mobile is also super, super interesting and exciting. So I'm definitely going to get someone on the team there.
Yeah, mobile's super cool. Don't sleep on it. Go sign up for Hello Helium. It's cool. But on the IoT side, like the whole adventure generally, it's still early. So it's never too late to get in there and play around with stuff. So we continually see it to evolve, and it's no less exciting today than it was for me 4 years ago. So
exactly.
It's all good stuff.
Well, thanks so much, man, for joining. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Cheers.
We'll talk soon.
Man.